Question, as Dwight Schrute might say. Why does it take a carpenter turned comedian to do the work that the media won't do? A decade ago, Adam Carolla invited Gavin Newsom on his podcast. This was Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom at the time. The conversation started nicely, and there was a lot of pleasantries back and forth, but then the more Newsom spoke, the more Carolla dug in and got a bit animated in the process. Here's just one of several really interesting exchanges.
Half of African Americans in the state of California, roughly half of Latino families, have no access to a checking account or an ATM, things we take for granted. They don't have a check.
What's wrong with them?
Well, because they don't have the resources to sock those things away.
Why do we have them?
A lot of different reasons, but roughly half those families don't. And
why do Armenians have them?
But where they end up is in the check cashing places.
But I want to know why those groups, why those two groups don't have access.
Well, a lot of just happens to be that. We can talk
they're
about
flawed?
This. No, they're hardly flawed, but they're struggling.
Genetically
Folks are making
flawed.
their word. Hardly, not absolutely.
But okay, do Asians have this problem?
I mean, a lot of communities have. A lot of whites have these problems.
Oh, but so it's not just black and Hispanic.
No, but
why did you bring up black and Hispanic?
Because the magnitude is ominous.
But why so many of them?
It just happens to be the magnitude.
That's the way God planned it?
Not at all.
Well, what happened to them?
There are a lot of issues, and that the communities are struggling. A lot
why
of new
are they
immigrants.
struggling?
A lot of different reasons. Lack
Hispanics
of opportunity.
have been here. Blacks have been here longer than we've been here.
Well, we can surmise.
What about Asians? They were put in internment camps.
Yeah, in fact it all initiated out of San Francisco. And the Chinese Exclusion Act came out.
Are they the check cash? Are they the check cash?
A lot of Asians certainly do.
So why don't you include them?
The only reason why is the magnitude.
There's so many more.
The magnitude in percentage
But there's no way to figure out how that happened.
We could talk about it. You know what I'm dealing with? I don't want to have a sociological debate.
Sure, why would you?
No, here's why.
Why would you want to do that? Because the person from the Times wouldn't write good things about you if you did that.
No, that's not the case. Because I want to deal with reality. No.
You want to deal with reality?
Looking back at that conversation, it was an epic battle between common sense and double talk. And there's no way in the world Newsom would ever go back on Carolla's podcast. Now, I don't blame him. You get your butt kicked like that, would you be itching for a second round? Of course not. But more importantly, you know that no other major journalist or even a minor journalist are going to pressure Newsom like Carolla did in that conversation. Not going to challenge him on his record, all the things he didn't do for California. Not a chance. We all know why, right? Do I even have to say it? But earlier this week, Megyn Kelly invited Carolla on her show, and the subject of Gavin Newsom came up again. She was playing a conversation of Newsom trying to spin his terrible, awful, no-good record on COVID-19 to a journalist. And of course, the journalist just nods along with the California governor. Yes, sir. No, sir. You're right, sir. Not any follow-up questions of consequence. It was pathetic, and it's what you get now. So when Kelly played that clip for Carolla, well, he went off on Newsom once again.
Number two, this guy is a goddamn sociopath. I talked to him. I stared into the eye of the beast for an hour and a half on my podcast, and all he does is lie. He like puts Brill cream on his teeth. I don't know why more idiots don't understand who this guy is. I lived in California. They shut down the beaches. They arrested people for paddleboarding in the harbor. They shut down all the beach volleyball courts. By the way, being outdoors, vitamin D, exercise, sunshine could have been the best thing for you during COVID. But no, he locked them all up in their apartments. This guy's a sociopathic, tyrannical dictator, and nobody should listen to a goddamn word this idiot says.
Now, Adam Carolla never went to college. He worked as a laborer out of high school, then he became a carpenter, and then he really elbowed his way into show business, and now he's a mainstay in the industry. He's got lots of common sense, though, and he applies it to the political scene in ways that are, I think, frankly delightful. Now, he may never get a second crack at Newsom, but Carolla's not going to stay silent about those progressive lies. It's a beautiful thing. And boy, don't we need more of just that? Matt Battaglia is a one-man army when it comes to disrupting pop culture. He's the creator of not one but two graphic novels, House on Fire and Ghost of the Carousel. The former takes an unflinching look at a dystopian future that's going to remind a lot of readers of what we just lived through with COVID. That was the point, and he'll explain more in a minute. But that's not all that Matt's up to. He's also an executive producer with a group called Free the People. And if you don't know them, they are dedicated to, and I quote, turning on the next generation to the values of personal liberty and peaceful cooperation. In other words, making America America again. Wouldn't that be nice? Free the People's recent projects include a sketch series called Comedy is Murder, starring the great comic Lou Perez. And the group also has another series going on now, brand new. It's called Adults Are Talking. It's a late-night style show, and also some sketches as well, featuring comedian Andrew Heaton. Now, if you don't know Lou Perez or Andrew Heaton, they are great comedians. They're funny, they're smart, they're provocative. They are, I would say, libertarian-leaning for sure, but they don't let ideology get in the way of a good joke, and that's important. Now, I want to play a sample of Comedy is Murder. And in this clip, they're mocking Apple's commitment to green energy and child labor. It's based on an actual video that Apple produced a few weeks ago featuring Octavia Spencer, yes, the Oscar winner. She's playing Mother Nature, and Apple executives are trying to tell her that we're doing all we can to save the planet. Except in this video, the Apple workers are boasting about using those tiny hands to make tiny gadgets for consumers.
Apple's child labor has a very small carbon footprint. And their actual footprints are really small too, because they're children.
I want to see you do more of this.
You want us to do more child labor?
We could actually use the help, Mother Nature. The kids don't work as fast as they should. Tiny hands. And they're super lazy. We'd see even higher profits and lower emissions if we increased our child labor workforce by about 95%.
95%?
We've secured the best child labor in China, India, Vietnam.
Paraguay, Brazil?
Not yet, but we could absolutely spin up some mines there by...
Let me guess. 50 years from now when someone else is left holding the bag?
By the end of next year, actually.
Not sure we can find another 40,000 child workers that fast, but we can try to traffic them. Say the word.
Matt is creating art that subverts pop culture and educates us at the same time. But just so you know, it's not a lecture. He is entertaining us first and foremost, but then you can find out what he has to say, and there are layers and layers to what he creates. I couldn't cheer him any louder, which is why I invited him on the show. I wanted to find out what else he's got up his sleeve, and you're going to find out just that right now. Matt, welcome to the show. You are a one-person content machine, which makes it a little hard for me to decide where to dive in, but it is my show, so I want to start with Comedy is Murder. It's a great series. Obviously, I've been following Lou Perez for a while. He's an excellent sketch comic. Can you share what your vision is for the series? Because the title is certainly kind of puckish, if you will, but obviously there's a greater sense when you watch the videos. But just as someone behind it, as someone behind the scenes, how would you describe it?
I feel like the best way to describe it is we're basically trying to give Lou the tools to let loose as much as possible, and the freedom to kind of do whatever stuff comes up, and so I think that collaboration has allowed us to play with some fun themes and go to some places that I'm not sure would have visually worked in the previously for him. So I think we've been able to really kind of, from both sides of it, the collaboration has allowed us to do some really fun stuff and push some boundaries and do some really creative stuff from a video perspective too. Yeah,
and Lou is, I guess to label him would be a libertarian, but he just follows the funny, which I really respect and appreciate. And I think what he does is he sees untapped areas or subjects that could be mocked that often aren't being mocked. I mean, it seems like that's one of his true north points at this point. One of the sketches that I just loved was the Apple sketch where that was, riffing on the Mother Nature little promotional bit they did where they brought in Octavia Spencer, and, she was Mother Nature, and they were talking about all their green potential and all their activities and how environmentally sound they are. And then your sketch basically said, yeah, and you use child labor too. It's amazing. Did you get any blowback from that sketch? I mean, what was the reaction when that comes out?
I think only positive. I mean, the blowback that we got were, I think that there were a number of people in comments who didn't actually get that it was a parody at first. And so there were people who'd seen the beginning of it and thought, oh, we're just resharing the original ad, and they'd get upset about it.
Yeah.
And then like on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it, they'd make some angry comment, and then 10 minutes later they'd be like, I'm sorry, I get it was a joke. But that was a fun one to make, especially because I think Lou and his buddy Greg, who directs the episodes, emailed and were like, we gotta do something on this.
Yeah.
And so we were planning on shooting something else, which was just shot yesterday, actually, as of this recording. And so but it was like, oh well, yeah, like this Apple commercial is just so deserving of being mocked, that we kind of all jumped on it and we're like, let's make this happen. And that was a really fun one to make. And I think that I think that it performed really well. And I think that people really enjoyed it. And it's one of those things where pointing out corporate hypocrisy, I think, is a topic that both people on the left and the right can enjoy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the work that you're doing these days, I don't think it's easily labeled. It's not hard right, it's not center, it's not left. It kind of moves across the board, which is fascinating and I think necessary too. One of the things I thought about the clip is that the speed at which you got it done, and it came out looking so slick. And to me, that's one of the great advantages we have now, as opposed to waiting for Saturday Night Live to put its stamp on a story, even though they don't really do much of anything these days, is the ability to kind of work on the fly. Do you have the resources, it looks like, to kind of make that happen? And how hard is it to get inspired and think, oh gosh, if I put this out in a week, it's not going to work like it is if I put it out in 24 hours?
It was funny. I think on set we were all joking, like, yeah, this feels like something that SNL would have done, but they were on strike, so they didn't do it. And so, I think technology is, where you can work on projects as a team, helps, because Greg generally edits the video, but then we'll do like audio mix and color and things like that. Another Matt that we work with, who's the DPs, the sketches, he'll usually do color and we'll go in and finesse it. And so like I was, driving back from the city from shooting it, I was syncing up all the files in the car ride back while the other Matt was driving us back to New Jersey. And of course, traffic getting out of New York into New Jersey, you're there for an hour anyways. Yeah. So that helps with speed, is, just the way that with Premiere and Adobe these days that you can do team projects and bounce things around without having to upload huge amounts of files and stuff. It helps. I mean, honestly, we're a very tiny team. So it's like the shoots are usually, 5 crew, if that, and then, actors. But then, like, the post-production there's really only 3 of us. Wow. So it's, 4 are one of the guys that are on our team, on the Free the People team. Logan also composes music. So sometimes I think one of his tracks is kind of backing that Apple sketch, but so often he'll compose music, but it's a really tiny team. And I think it allows us to be a little bit nimble, but we're kind of always running around with our hair on fire too.
Well, I think what you're describing is a genuine threat to Hollywood in a way. And comedian Roy Wood Jr., who's just quit The Daily Show, he talked about that. He said, a lot of these YouTubers are making really slick productions, and they have the speed, which we just talked about, and they're a threat to late night TV because you don't have to wait until 11 at night to get some of these topical jokes in your feed. You can just go on YouTube or Rumble or wherever and see it. Talk a little bit about how the technological barriers are just collapsing, because the work you do, and it's not just you, other creators as well, looks good. That Apple sketch, I don't care how quickly it had to turn it around, you could put that on SNL tomorrow and no one blinks an eye, and no one says, oh gosh, what did they do? NBC's got all this might and this corporate power, and they put out this crappy video. No, It looks great. Do you see that sort of this is going to be pressuring the existing network and existing Hollywood system in a way?
Well, I think that the funny thing with video is for so long there have been sort of it's been expensive to make films, sketch comedy, whatever. It's expensive endeavor, and the cost barrier of entry has really significantly dropped from a technological standpoint. So you can make things that look good with at a fraction of the cost of what it was, 10 years ago. And that definitely helps a lot. And I also think that the other thing is that the paradigm has shifted in so much as that I think that we all think about something like SNL as the the gatekeeper, but if you look at a guy like Shane Gillis, where the best thing that happened to him was that he got casted and then immediately booted off of SNL, and the sketches that he's produced with the
Gillian
Keeves are better than anything SNL has put out in that time frame. So I do think that I don't know if it's necessarily that we're all in this competition so much as that I think that where people's eyeballs are shifting, and I think that the competition more is and it's something that you've done a great service for us in writing these sketches up and helping get them out there is just cutting through the noise, because there's just so much stuff at all times that the thing that we need really more than ever now is people to help curate things.
Sure.
Because you're just inundated with so much, so much entertainment. I love the word content, but
it is what it is, though.
I don't have a better catch-all.
Yeah.
But there's just so much of it out there.
By the way, I recently spoke to someone who's a pretty big player at a pretty big organization, and he was talking directly, actually both were, about curating these kinds of I guess, like I said, the word is weird, but content, and putting it out there for the masses. And I'm hoping that conversation goes forward. But I'm going to stop the conversation briefly because I want to ask you something that I should have done at the very beginning. And it just came to me, which is my fault. But who are you as a creator, Matt? And just to give you a little background here, I am a right of center film critic and entertainment reporter. What I do is I try to represent half the country that is not represented, and I also try to spread the word about good, right-of-center, subversive art while promoting free speech. That's me. And I think if you listen to the show, you'll get a sense of who I am. But I'm kind of curious, how would you define yourself? Because I've known your work. We're just talking now for the first time. I have a sense of who you are, but I'm kind of curious how you describe yourself.
I would say that from the art perspective, I think of myself, I like to think of myself as a cartoonist in some ways, because drawing comics is a creative passion of mine. It's the most personal work that I put out there. And then from the film perspective, when Free the People began, we were primarily producing documentaries. I directed and edited the Off the Grid documentary about Congressman Thomas Massey that we put out a number of years ago that has really, I think it's had legs, and Massey uses it frequently to prove his bona fides. And so I would say from the political standpoint, I had when I first sort of began this journey, 11 years ago, I went to DC and was working at Freedom Works, which is where I met Matt Kibbe. And my mercenary thought at the time, having grown up in New Jersey, I went to Rutgers. And when I got out of college, finding a graphic design job in the New York area, there's a lot of competition. And my mercenary thought was, right-wing political organizations probably aren't getting a lot of people with even a Rutgers art degree applying, and it turns out that was true, and so that kind of started that journey. I would say that also a lot of the there's probably some latent libertarianism in my thought, simply because a lot of comics from I'd say like the late 80s and 90s, and that indie comic scene have a pretty strong streak of libertarianism in them. You read interviews from when Miller's doing Dark Knight Returns in Sin City, and he frequently will reference like Ayn Rand. And, you know, you look at a guy like Paul Pope, who's a big influence of mine, you know, who did a Batman comic where he rescues Ludwig von Mises from the Nazis. So there's certainly some, you know, maybe some things that I didn't realize were influences of mine politically that eventually sort of came through. And I guess that's a very long-winded way of getting where I am today.
No, it's interesting. And I also think that the best way to do art from your perspective is to just create. And then because it's in your DNA, it's in your thinking, sometimes those themes will be apparent in your work, but it's not like you're lecturing and you know, putting in little speeches in your performances and your clips. Because I think that can often be the kiss of death. I'll rejoin the interview currently in progress by saying that I've been following Andrew Heaton for a while. He's such a funny guy. He's so interesting. He's so clever. Again, not beholden to either party. And every time I think about late night TV, I think, oh man, why doesn't someone give Andrew Heaton a late night show? And you've done the next best thing, which is Adults Are Talking, which is new on the scene, and it does put Andrew in that kind of format with some sketches, with some interviews. Share a little bit about your vision for the show, because I love Andrew to death, and I just think it's such a great choice.
Yeah, I mean, that you kind of hit the nail on the head with where we wanted to go with it. It was funny, you know, both of these projects sort of were coming into being at the same time, and I think it's a fun contrast. I mean, I would say between, you know, you have The Comedy is Murder, which I think is, you know, tonally a little bit like you know, raw, you know, Lou's brand of comedy is very different than from Andrew Heaton's brand of comedy. And I think it's cool to have both of them sort of, you know, living together in a way. Heaton's show, we wanted to, you know, with both of them, we want to be able to say, okay, well, you guys are kind of a showrunner. How can we emphasize your personalities? And what tools can we bring to the table from a production standpoint, that where we can give you the ability to maybe try some things that you haven't been able to before. And so we often have to get a little creative, but like, with how do we stretch dollars, but like that Foxhole sketch, I don't think that Heaton wasn't necessarily going to do that at Reason necessarily, because there's no point to it. It's just there to be funny. Yeah. And there's nothing funnier than gallons of blood. So
Monty Python would be pleased. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously where our heads were at, and then you wrap this Michael Malice interview up in that format, and you kind of are hopefully, and people who are watching it, they get some laughs, and then they, you know, you hear a Michael Malice interview about the evils of communism in the middle there, and the way that Heaton does the interview, it keeps it light, even though it's an extremely dark topic, but the hope is that you're working some of these liberty themes in without, like you said, hitting anyone over the head with it. And I think with all of these productions, you know, it's just trying to allow people to like be as creative as you can be, and trusting that all of our instincts are correct, and that the philosophy comes through in the work, without being without putting it into a 3-chapter speech like a writer that was previously mentioned.
Gotcha. You know, you've got all this going on. I'm sure it keeps you very busy. You're literally in cars editing work. And now, of course, you also do graphic novels. House on Fire and Ghost of the Carousel are two of them. House really struck me. I mean, I can go on and on for days about my thoughts on COVID. Was that the inspiration for the book, or did it overlap with something you wanted to tell? Can you maybe just kind of, because it's a dystopian. It's a man trying to kind of break through the system, caring for his wife. There are health issues. There's lots of things going on, but it's chilling in a way that I think maybe if it came out 10 years ago, it wouldn't be quite as numbing. But you tell me, what was the creative fire behind it?
Oh, it was 100% COVID.
Okay.
It was drawn. The whole thing was written and drawn, I think it came out like 2022, like end of 21 into 22, basically. So it was entirely my trying to process and react to it. And in some ways trying to, just figure out what the hell went on with the world, and where might we be going, and sort of work through that terror. And part of it is maybe aspirational, is that if we were in that instance, I would hope that I'm able to have the fortitude of the protagonist in the book.
There's a real rebellious streak in the character that, something we saw in short supply during the COVID situation.
Yeah, the character certainly has more is a bit braver than I might be in real life. So, but yeah, I mean, it was something that definitely was a reaction to it. I didn't want to make it explicitly about it, but I think anyone with a pulse who reads it, can tell what was on my mind. And yeah, I thought it was. I didn't see any real art come out of lockdowns or anything. I remember, post 9/11, the wealth of art that was made dealing with it, and then even post Afghanistan, the art made dealing with those wars. And there hasn't been, and maybe it's because we keep, veering so rapidly from tragedy to tragedy, that no one has had any time to process these things. But I just found it odd that there was, outside of Van Morrison putting out a few angry records, there really wasn't much response to 2020.
That's a really fascinating statement that I hadn't thought of. I will mention two examples that are defy that, but you're right. In general, you're right. One was Reopening, which is a Blaze TV film that I guess they acquired. It's quite good. It's very funny. It's a little bit like Waiting for Guffman.
Oh, is that the one about the play that they were putting on?
Yeah, so it's basically they're reopening during COVID with all the safety precautions, and it really does satire. It's satirical look at what we went through without hitting you over the head. It's very whimsical, very well done. The tone is just spot on. It's impressive. But also, I think comedians like Jimmy Dore, who was a former guest on this show, some of his stand-up material has been brilliant on COVID, and how, when you question things like that's no longer acceptable. I mean, I can't do him justice, but I think those are the rare examples where artists are responding to what happened. And I think there was very, very little of that. When I think about the work you do, you mentioned sort of from a pragmatic point of view, you're on the right. And I guess it's a fair assessment, but I think of your work as more subversive than anything else. And I think there are other subversive voices bubbling up. Are you optimistic that will continue, or do you think that maybe the fear of censorship and not getting the brass ring, whether it's a gig on Saturday Night Live or other sort of goals, that will kind of keep these voices down?
It's so hard to know. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the medium that you're working in, and what each individual's goals are. I found that in comics, because it's such a poor medium, that once I made peace with the fact that you're not selling millions of copies of a book, then you can be a little bit more like, well, I'm just doing this for me at a certain point, and I would love for people to obviously buy House on Fire, but making it a piece that was personal, basically freed me of any kind of worries. And I had a publisher who was, willing to put it out and take a risk, but I was free from worrying about, what's so and so critic gonna think or whatever. I do think that artists, there is a rebellious streak that I feel like is happening, but I don't know that that's across the board. I found that with some of these comedy productions, we've been getting, new people in on them. And I think people have enjoyed the sense of freedom on set to kind of be funny and not police themselves and things like that. And I imagine that that's happening more frequently all over. And I would think that even the strikes and all that stuff has probably sped that up. I'm sad to report that my favorite medium of comics feels less open in some ways. Like the mainstream of it feels very closed off, but obviously there are a lot of people doing their own thing and being extremely successful. So, ultimately the internet has opened up all of the, removed all the gatekeepers. And now it's just, if you're an artist, you can no longer just be an artist. You also have to be marketer, business person. And all of these things that being that artists generally, myself included, are really bad at. And so trying to find ways to make your art successful is really hard. The one other point, because we were talking about COVID things, Free the People, we did make a couple of documentaries about that time period. And one called All We Have, and then another one that should be launching soon called Everyone is Welcome, about 2 restaurants going through COVID. And I thought that was important to document it as well. But as far as hope for artistic futures, I feel like we're starting to see people rebel against the status quo, and hopefully consumers and customers support that, because ultimately that's what decides what gets, I think, what people can make and how frequently they can make it is if the eyeballs and the dollars are there. Because if they're not, then you're just going to get Disney's Snow White remake. Or
That's
whatever.
right. And we're all excited for that. Matt, before I let you go, given all the work you've been doing and the work you've done in the recent past, have you run into barriers, and not just maybe a publisher passes on your book, because that happens all the time and that can be very subjective, but given the work that you're doing is often poking culture in the eye in a sense, have you faced any blowback from that of any consequence, or is it hard to tell when it happens because it is a little bit fuzzy?
Well, fortunately with like the stuff that Free the People is producing, where we are our own masters, so we generally can pursue what we want. And so that's great. And Matt Kibbe is pretty happy to let us sort of experiment with whatever we want to experiment with. And so that's great. So that helps. With comic stuff, I did get one not so nice review for House on Fire, but it was kind of I thought it was an interesting review, honestly. I think that he was struggling with his feelings about COVID, and I don't think that he necessarily liked the mirror that was put up to him in the book, which was cool. It was cool to read that from that perspective, because the other reviews were generally people who I felt like probably were coming from a similar, were generally coming from a similar place. I mean, obviously the review that was on glennbeck.com was, they were like, they read things into it that I hadn't even considered, where it's like, they've banned gas stoves. And I was like, there's not even he actually uses a gas stove in the book, but yeah, sure, why not? There's a sort of certain level of being fortunate with working at Free the People, where we have that outlet. And then with the comic stuff, Living the Line Books, who published House on Fire, is Sean Robinson over there, who's the publisher there, is just a great guy who is more than willing to take risks on stuff that he thinks is good. And him and Carson Grubaugh put out the first AI illustrated comic called Abolition of Man, which is it's criticizing AI by using AI, and a lot of the critics comics sort of culture just saw the word AI and they were up in arms and angry about it without actually reading any of the book or understanding any of the context around it. And so the fact that he's willing to do those kinds of things is great. And I think that the more, both the more people from a publishing side, be it groups like Free the People or be it publishers like Living the Line, that are willing to take chances on work and support that work. And the support is really important. And it's what I think that it's something that you do that I think is great, where you're supporting good art and trying to put it out in front of more people. And that's what we need to build that ecosystem of, hey, here's a cool thing. Let's stop complaining about stuff we don't like. Here's something that you will like. Go support that, and stop worrying about the sort of the legacy media, because there's so many more options now. Why do we need to concern ourselves with stuff that we don't like?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that support is crucial, not just from people like me who maybe spread the word a bit, but from the audience, the consumers who say, oh, that was a really funny sketch. Not only do I enjoy it, I'm going to share it. I'm going to go on social media and tell some friends about it, because that's where the power happens. But Matt, thank you so much for joining the Hollywood in Total podcast. I've got a lot of things to recommend, obviously based on your work. Just go to freethepeople.com. You'll find Adulterer Talking with Andrew Heaton. You'll see the Comedy is Murder series with the great Lou Perez. There's so much content there. More and more is coming, thank goodness. So keep it up. And also you can check out his graphic novels, House on Fire and Ghosts of the Carousel. I didn't get a chance to talk about Ghosts, but both books, I'm a recovering art major. The artwork is really impressive, very powerful. The use of color, the black and white, it's excellent. So even if you don't even read the books, obviously they're well worth reading, but just the visuals alone are worth the price of admission. So Matt, keep up the great work, and we will talk again about future projects, because it sounds like you're not slowing down. I think you're speeding up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
All righty, there's another bonus episode in the can. What's a can? Where does that phrase even come from? If you know, I'd love it if you emailed me at christian@hollywoodintoto.com. Share the answers. I'll share it with the audience next time. Or just tell me what you think about the show. What you like, what you don't like, what we could do better, what we could do even worse. I want to hear your feedback. Be gentle, but let her rip. For now, stay safe and keep defending the First Amendment. It'll slide away if we don't take a stand, and we take it now.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.